Good morning, church. Good morning. The reading this morning is from James chapter 3, verses 1 to 12. Not many of you should become teachers, my fellow believers, because you know that we who teach will be judged more strictly. We all stumble in many ways. Anyone who is never at fault in what they say is perfect, able to keep their whole body in check. When we put bits into the mouths of horses to make them obey us, we can turn the whole animal. Or take ships, for example. Although they are so large and are driven by strong winds, they are steered by a very small rudder wherever the pilot wants to go. Likewise, the tongue is a small part of the body, but it makes great boasts. Consider what a great forest is set on fire by a small spark. The tongue also is a fire, a world of evil among the parts of the body. It corrupts the whole body, sets the whole course of one's life on fire, and is itself set on fire by hell. All kinds of animals, birds, reptiles, and sea creatures are being tamed and have been tamed by mankind. But no human being can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil, full of deadly poison. With the tongue we praise our Lord and Father, and with it we curse human beings who have been made in God's likeness. Out of the same mouth come praise and cursing. My brothers and sisters, this should not be. Can both fresh water and salt water flow from the same spring? My brothers and sisters, can a fig tree bear olives or a grapevine bear figs? Neither can a salt spring produce fresh water.
Preventing Forest Fires, that's the actual title in the book that we're using to guide us through James. And thank you, Margaret, for reading. And it's pretty scary, actually, when you start reading these things. And like I said the last time I preached, sometimes I look at the Bible and I go, I really don't want to read anymore. This is not good. Because it kind of goes, yeah. I have a knife about twice the size of this that I bought at the Iguazu Falls in South America, and I took it back on the plane, which was before 9/11. I mean, it's a huge blade, but the Bible's like that. It cuts right to the center of our being, and it's so contemporary, it is unreal. Wilma and I were talking about it this morning, and as you live, and as you think, and as you breathe, and as you look at the TV, the Bible hits you right where it hurts. Really does. The power of our words and our speech is basically what these verses are talking about. Absolutely amazing how contemporary it is. And I was thinking, what is it all about? What is it all about? Is it about gossip? Well, I think it includes gossip, but unfortunately it goes far wider than just gossiping about people. It's talking about the whole of our speech. How we speak about people, how we speak to people, how we speak to ourselves about people. Even up here in our thought. And I want to give a few examples, some very tragic examples. This beautiful young girl, because people posted up nasty videos because they communicated to her that life wasn't worth living, she kills herself. Those words had an effect on Molly. And we just saw a couple of weeks ago, or was it last week, how Meta were brought up in front of the coroner to actually answer questions and say, do you think these things are good for young people? And the person has to say, no, they're not. Social media, I don't know if you're on social media or not. I am. But Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, Twitter, YouTube, they're all, as I said last time, you want to watch how people lose their minds, go to YouTube comments. People lose their minds on Twitter and on YouTube and social media, and they argue. I'm hoping this works. I'm looking to Andy, but let's see. Whoop. How people argue on the internet. Their dogs kind of... we were walking down a street in Bolivia, and this dog was sitting by the road, and it ran inside of its gate and started barking at us wildly. It was really funny. That's what people are like on Twitter. Also, people are like in their cars. We argue with unkind words. The unkindness, be kind to one another. So many times people play the person and not the ball. If a person doesn't have the ball, you're not supposed to tackle them. But people do. They say, oh, you believe that because. You believe that because. How many times do we do that? And of course, gossip. Gossip disempowers the person who is being gossiped about, because they don't know what you're saying about them. You're forming an idea in somebody else's mind about that person without them knowing. They have no right to reply. They have no opportunity to reply. And of course, yes, the rather bad example of politicians, the name calling, that you believe this because you are no good, you can't do this, you whatever. It's really poisonous. And we have a parliament that sits opposite one another, and that is why do you know this? Why it's a metre and a half apart between the two parties? Sorry? Two sword lengths apart, so they can't stab each other. But they stab each other with words. And this one that really hurts, body shaming, clothes shaming, slut shaming, religious shame, especially towards women. Constantly, women who are athletes, celebrities, politicians get shamed. And here's an example. Sorry about the language here, but he's a stud, she's a slut. We form ideas in people's minds by the way we speak. Insults to people when they don't deserve it. And how many times have I heard, oh, well, they're a celebrity. They don't, they show themselves up, they deserve it. Do they? Really? Is that really true? Or is it just we find, or people find pleasure out of hurting each other? And James comes into this situation, and he wrote 2,000 years ago, and he knew exactly what it meant. James takes teachers as the example. And if you remember, you won't remember this, but I do. My friend Dave Sunman, when I was inducted here, preached on this verse. Not many of you should be called teachers, or you should be very careful about being teachers, and here am I, teaching pastor. Great, isn't it? But why? Because teachers are a great example of people whose words have power. The words we speak, the words I have, the words I say have power. I remember talking to my father while we were in Latin America, and I was involved in speaking and studying and preaching, but also involved in committees and this sort of thing. And my dad said, Paul, be so careful about how you speak. Because your words, and especially as a missionary, has massive effects on people's lives and the way they act. Why should we be careful? 1, verses 3 to 6, because small things control big things. The bit, the bridle, it's gone from my mind. What's the word? The rudder as well. They're all tiny little things. Have you seen those pilots bringing ships into dock? You go, my word, that is incredible. It's a tiny little thing in comparison to this massive ship, yet it turns it. Because the uncontrollability of the tongue. How many times do I say something and I wish, I want to get it back, but I can't. It's said, it's done, it's gone. It's made an effect on people. It's hurt somebody. And because the tongue can do good, can be a tool, but actually its tendency is towards evil. And James seems to be saying that our words are the most clear expressions of our human sinfulness. He's making a very deep theological point here. Our words show the depth of our own human sin and our own human depravity, because we use them to hurt. And the tendency is always to hurt. I don't know if you've ever tried on a hill like this to ride a bike that way. It's always going, That's the way the tongue is. That's the way our human words are, always tending towards evil. And there is so much. And most of this is, it's not going to be long, this sermon, but I went through and looked at all the words about speech in the Bible. Not all of them. Don't have time for that. James says earlier on in the book, he says, those who consider themselves religious, and I looked up the word very carefully here, it doesn't mean religious, we've used the term religious. Those who think themselves pious and holy, and yet do not keep a tight rein on their tongues, deceive themselves, and their piety is worthless. It's one of those times when you go, okay, James, just don't beat around the bush, mate. Just tell me exactly what you think. It's like worthless. All your piety goes down the tube. You flush it when we say bad words about other people. Those who seem devout and yet do not keep a tight rein on their tongues deceive their own heart, and their devotion is worthless. And I looked at that and I thought, this is where I started thinking about, how do I think about people? Even at that level, how do I form thoughts about people in my mind that then become reality in our lives? And the way I speak about people. So what does the rest of the Bible say? You should not give false testimony against your neighbor. One of the basic tenets of Jewish law was keep your tongue honest. Because if you don't, you often put people into situations where they will suffer. And bearing false testimony was in a court. So if you what do we call it? Perjury? When you tell a lie in court, because actually you're distorting justice, and God is a God of justice. Ephesians 4, then we will no longer be infants, tossed around by waves, carried around by every wind of teaching, by their clever cunning, men and women that speak their deceitful scheming. Instead, speaking the truth in love, we will grow and become in every respect the mature body of him who is the head, who is Christ. If you want to become like Christ, speak the truth, but always do it in love. Always do it in love. And that comes back to our questioning of ourselves, doesn't it? Why am I going to say what I'm just about to say? Is it to make people, to build them up, or is it to tear them down? John says, you belong to your father the devil. Jesus is speaking to the Pharisees. And you carry out your father's desires. He's a murderer from the beginning, not holding to the truth because there is no truth in him. And I put those two verses up side by side. One, speak the truth in love, be like Christ. Don't speak the truth and become like the other guy, the devil, because he's a liar. And how many times many of us, even at a very personal level, believe the lies of the devil about God, about others, and about ourselves. And we tell ourselves, and we repeat the devil's lies to ourselves, about others, about ourselves. Paul says, good advice, act wisely towards outsiders, redeeming the time. Let your speech be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer everybody. I don't know if you've ever read the life of St. Francis of Assisi. His words were always gracious, always loving, always building up, always honest. Ephesians 4, do not let unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen. What a beautiful, beautiful verse that is. Only which is helpful building each other up. Now, I've said before, Ephesians is one of my favorite books. It's such a fantastic theological book. But here comes Paul. All this great theology comes down to, like our American brothers and sisters would say, where the rubber hits the road. How do you speak? How do we build others up? In your hearts, revere Christ as Lord. Again, that connection between relationship with Jesus Christ and our words. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you, to give the reason for the hope that you have. But do this with gentleness and respect. So often we get accused as Christians, and sometimes rightly, of being arrogant, of being judgmental, of being nasty. When we give the hope that's within us with gentleness and respect, we reflect Jesus Christ. And Luke's gospel is made up of so many of the sayings of Jesus. It's basically the sayings of Jesus. There are his actions, but also his words. And Luke 6, the good person out of good treasure of his heart produces good. And the evil person out of his evil treasure produces evil. For out of the abundance of the heart, his mouth speaks. What's inside comes out. And I mean, I'm speaking to myself because I know that I can get angry, I can get resentful, I can get annoyed, and then you say it. And how many times have I, and how many times have you gone, did I just say that? I didn't mean to say that. Did it come out? Oh dear. Am I speaking aloud? If I'm thinking aloud, oh dear, we are. Even fools, this is one of my favourite proverbs. Even fools are thought wise if they keep silent, and discerning if they hold their tongue. That's a great line, isn't it? And it reminds me of this saying, better to remain silent and thought a fool than to speak and to remove all doubt. It's given to Abraham Lincoln, Mark Twain, several people. But there you go. Better to keep quiet and let people think you're an idiot than actually to open your mouth and take away all doubt completely. So keep quiet. Let your words be few. And that is a message for those of us who are peddlers of words, that we should let our words be few. Now, I want to introduce you to something that might be it's a bit more sort of academic, if you like, but discourse theory. A guy called Michael Foucault said, our speech is shaped by our culture as well as shaping it. We form mental images by our speech. We create reality by our speech. An example. We want to employ a new accountant. When he starts, what we want him to do is we want him to do that. You're going to employ a man, aren't you? Because our words have created realities. How many times we use, I was thinking about this, the adjectives we put together, how we describe somebody. He's a bit of a lad, or whatever, or a conservative evangelical. And so I've heard somebody say that, and I think I'm a little more radical than you maybe, mate. But we put these words together because they suit us, not because they're true, and we form a reality by what we say. It's a very dangerous thing, the tongue, and James is very, very aware of this. And really, as a conclusion, the tongue is a loaded weapon. If I were to walk through the streets of Bourne with a loaded gun and the police knew it, would I be arrested?
Absolutely.
Thank you. At least. Because loaded weapons are dangerous, and the tongue is a loaded weapon and can go off at any time because we are who we are. So what is the solution to this? And I hope you've got this throughout all the verses that I've been repeating to you. Christ. Christ. He is the one who is the one who unloads the weapon, who takes the bullets out. Because you look at him, once you love like he does, we simply won't do it. It's not a matter of just simply trying. It's a matter of listening to him. And I would challenge us all, go back, read the Gospels. Listen to the words of Jesus. How did he speak? Especially, how did he speak to the powerful? How did he speak to the weak? Luke's got this perfectly in Luke 18 and 19. The man who's born blind, we find out he's Bartimaeus. And so he says, "Son of David, have mercy on me." So Jesus says, "What do you want me to do for you?" All the disciples are going, "Blind." It's obvious. White stick gives it away. But he's not going to impress upon this man his will. He's going to ask that man, "What do you want me to do for you?" But he goes on a few yards and he sees Zacchaeus in the tree. He says, "Zacchaeus, get down here. I'm coming to your house." If you follow the song "Well for Tea," which is a very British thing to do. Jesus speaks differently to different people because he's doing it always out of love. And what does he say at the end to Zacchaeus? He begins with the instruction, get down here, Zacchaeus. And he finishes the discourse with Zacchaeus by saying, salvation has come to this house because this man is also a son of Abraham. Don't you just love him? Don't you just absolutely adore this person who speaks love constantly into the lives of the powerful and the weak? What an incredible person. Well, he is God. So what do? We got to listen clearly how we communicate to ourselves and to others. And I would finish, and I will finish, with love covers all our communication. So following a very fine preacher, is it true, is it kind, is it necessary? Asking ourselves those things is a good thing to do. And most of all, well, what would Christ do in this situation? Not every time. And we've heard it both from Mark and from Chris this morning. Sometimes you have to say hard things to people, like you're nicked. But how do we do it is the important thing. So social media, think before you post. Even Twitter has a button where you can say, nope. Even Twitter. I hope Elon Musk keeps it on because it's a good thing to do. How do we speak about others? How do we speak about them to other people? Do we try and build them up or do we try and tear them down? And how do we speak to others? How do we actually communicate? How do we communicate to other people in the street? How do we communicate to our colleagues? How do we communicate to our children? How do we communicate to our wives or husbands? How do we communicate to anybody? How do we do that? Do we do it with a kind voice? Do we do it with a harsh voice? How do we communicate? Do we do it out of Christ's love or not? So here's a challenge for us. Make a critical assessment of how people speak about each other and to each other in all walks of life. Do it on the telly. Have a look at the interviews of politicians. Have a look at the newspapers and how people speak about each other. Make a critical assessment. Not to say, oh, they're bad and I'm good, but just to say, I am just as open, I'm just as vulnerable to doing this as they are. How do I speak about people? How do I speak them up? Do I try and build them up? Do I try and say, you should love and respect this person? Or do I try and tear them down? And how do we speak to others? How can we be more like Jesus Christ to build up and not to destroy? And I'm going to finish. I thought I had another one. But anyway, above all, love each other, because love covers a multitude of sins. May the words of our mouths and the meditations of our heart be acceptable in your sight, O God, our Redeemer. Amen.